All right, buckle up, because you guys sent in some seriously fascinating stuff. This Patrick Bet-David and Piers Morgan conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm talking a deep dive into politics, media.
Okay.
It's all this stuff that's like shaping our world, right? And we're going to try to figure out not just what's happening, but why it's happening the way it is.
Like a behind-the-scenes look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like getting a peek behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're revealing all these strategies. Like we're getting the decoder ring to the whole political media landscape.
Absolutely, yes.
So we're going to decode it together, pull out all the juicy bits, the key takeaways.
Yeah.
You know, so you can really understand what's going on in the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Let's kick things off with their analysis of Donald Trump.
Okay.
They highlight these 3 core principles he seems to live by.
Mm-hmm.
Always attack, always claim victory, and never accept loss. And they even bring up this like fascinating story about this lawyer, Roy Cohn, who was like notorious, right?
Yeah.
And he supposedly advised Trump to take this approach in the cutthroat world of New York politics.
Interesting.
So you might be thinking,
Ruthless.
like, whoa, that sounds pretty ruthless.
Definitely.
But they argue that this approach, combined with, you know, Trump's unique personality, helps him connect with a certain segment of the population.
Right.
It's like he's playing a different game
Absolutely different
than traditional politicians who focus on policy details and all those nuanced arguments.
The nuts and bolts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Trump, on the other hand, he taps into raw emotion. You know, he projects this image of strength, defiance.
Right. He's not afraid to ruffle feathers.
It's almost like he's operating on instinct.
Yeah, gut feeling.
Yeah. And they argue that this instinctual approach, like this willingness to just break the rules of the game, is a huge part of his appeal.
Makes sense.
It allows him to bypass like traditional media.
The ones that are always criticizing him?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he connects directly with voters through alternative channels.
Like what?
Podcasts, especially.
Oh, interesting.
They highlight his appearance on Joe Rogan's show.
Oh, yeah. Huge audience.
Huge audience, right.
Yeah.
And it's an audience that doesn't necessarily follow traditional news.
Right.
So by going on Rogan's show and speaking directly to those listeners, Trump basically controls the narrative.
That's smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they compare this with Kamala Harris's approach,
which is way
more traditional, right?
Yeah.
And they see it as less effective in today's media landscape, which is so fragmented.
Right. Everyone's getting their news from everywhere.
Yeah, it's like she's playing by the old rules while Trump is rewriting them.
Interesting.
So they're suggesting that he's not just changing the game, he's changing how it's played.
Yeah, he's changing the whole playbook.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
And this shift towards alternative media, like those podcasts, they see that as a major trend.
It's only going to get bigger.
Yeah, it's like here to stay.
Definitely.
What's fascinating is that even Piers Morgan, who, you know...
he's been in the game forever.
Yeah, he's a traditional media guy.
Yeah.
He even acknowledges this shift.
Really?
Yeah, he talks about how surprised he was by younger audiences who were just so engaged with alternative media.
Wow.
And even his own career was kind of revitalized by embracing these new platforms.
That's wild.
It's like the gatekeepers of information, the old guard, are losing their grip.
Interesting.
And there's this whole new era of media emerging.
So what happens to the traditional outlets then?
Right. That's the big question.
Yeah.
You know, they're facing declining viewership. They're struggling to connect with younger audiences.
It's a tough spot.
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
They're going to have to figure out how to adapt.
Absolutely.
Now back to Trump. While they see his strategies as super effective, they do point out some potential weaknesses.
Like what?
They suggest that his strength as a negotiator might not translate well to politics.
Politics is a whole other beast.
Yeah. They highlight the difference between, like, business dealings, where you have clear winners and losers, and politics, which is much more nuanced.
That's gray areas.
You got to build coalitions, navigate all those complex relationships.
It's like the difference between closing a deal and building an alliance.
So you can't just bully your way to success in politics.
Not always, no.
Interesting.
You have to compromise, build trust, persuade people, get them to buy into your vision.
It's a different skill set.
Definitely.
They even suggest that Trump's reliance on personal loyalty could be a vulnerability, especially with figures like J.D. Vance.
How so?
Well, they say the media could exploit this by portraying Vance as being, like, under Trump's thumb.
Even if it's not true.
Yeah, even if their alliance is genuine.
Classic divide and conquer.
Right. Create that perception of weakness.
So discord.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what they're saying.
It's all about perception in politics.
It's everything.
Now, they also dive into this fascinating topic of rising anxiety levels,
Oh, yeah.
especially among young people.
It's like, we have it all.
Seems paradoxical, right?
Yeah.
Longer lifespans, more access to information, more opportunities.
Yet we're more anxious than ever.
But anxiety is through the roof.
Wild, right?
And they link it to the rise of smartphones.
Interesting.
They cite this book, Anxious Generation,
Okay.
which suggests that anxiety in children started spiking around 2012.
Huh.
The same time smartphones became, like, ubiquitous.
Wow, that's when everyone got them.
Think about how much our lives have changed.
Totally.
We're constantly connected,
Always online.
bombarded with information, images,
Comparing ourselves.
always comparing ourselves.
Yeah.
It's no wonder anxiety is on the rise.
Makes sense.
We're always on, always plugged in, scrolling, feeling like we're not doing enough.
It's exhausting.
So stressful, especially for young people who are still figuring things out.
Definitely.
And they point to social media as a major contributor.
How so?
It presents this distorted view of reality.
Everyone's showing their highlight reel.
Yeah, and it creates these unrealistic standards.
Yeah.
It's like looking through a filter.
Yeah.
Everyone else's life seems perfect,
Well, yours.
and yours feels inadequate.
Yeah, it's tough.
That's a constant competition for validation.
Definitely.
And they argue that this pressure to present a perfect image
Yeah.
is contributing to this epidemic of anxiety,
Makes sense.
especially among young people.
So what's the solution?
They emphasize limiting screen time,
Okay.
encouraging real-world connections,
Right.
fostering a sense of accomplishment outside the digital world.
That phone curfew they mentioned is interesting.
You ever tried that?
I haven't, but it's worth considering.
Yeah, creating boundaries, unplugging. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the global landscape.
Okay.
The changing power dynamics between the West and countries like Russia, China, Iran.
Big players.
They go beyond just politics and military.
Oh.
They delve into the economics.
Interesting.
They highlight Russia's vast natural resources
Yeah.
and how those resources could be a major factor in this power shift.
Right.
They even point to the changing attitudes towards supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Fewer Republicans are in favor of continued aid.
Interesting.
They suggest it reflects this growing awareness of the economic interests tied to the conflict.
It's never black and white.
It's a reminder that geopolitics are rarely black and white.
Right.
Complex motivations, agendas,
Yeah.
and they highlight Putin as a key player in this geopolitical chess match.
Makes sense.
His control over those resources makes him a formidable figure.
Definitely.
They even bring up Putin's endorsement of Kamala Harris,
Wow, really?
speculating that he might think she's easier to negotiate with than Trump.
Huh. That's a thought.
It makes you wonder if a second Trump term would lead to a more confrontational approach.
With Russia.
Yeah,
Possibly.
it's a bold prediction.
Definitely.
They're suggesting that Trump's approach could have a huge impact on these power dynamics.
For sure, his unpredictability keeps everyone on their toes.
He's a wild card.
Definitely a wild card.
Now, before we move on,
Okay.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier
What's that?
about Trump's potential for transformative change in a second term.
Uh-huh.
They brought up Elon Musk's advice to cut government spending drastically.
Right. Like a major overhaul.
And they draw this parallel between Musk's success streamlining Twitter
Yeah.
and applying similar strategies to government bureaucracy.
Interesting.
They argue that Musk's reduction of Twitter's workforce
Yeah.
shows the potential for efficiency gains.
Without sacrificing effectiveness.
Right.
Okay.
But isn't that a pretty controversial approach?
For sure.
Like cutting government jobs, programs.
Could have major consequences.
Oh.
It would be a radical shift.
It would definitely face opposition.
No doubt.
But they seem to suggest that it could lead to a more efficient, responsive government, potentially addressing those concerns about overreach and waste.
A lot to think about there.
All right, we've covered a lot.
We have.
Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive into their thoughts on the trade deficit, big tech, and what a second Trump term could actually look like.
Sounds good. Yeah, it would be fascinating to see if that could actually work in practice. Like, could you really apply those same principles?
And they also talk about the trade deficit
Okay.
between the U.S. and other countries, specifically China.
Right.
And I love how they break it down
Yeah.
using this simple analogy. Okay. Imagine two salespeople who agree to, like, exchange referrals.
Okay.
One salesperson consistently sends referrals,
Yeah.
boosting the other's business.
All right.
But the other doesn't reciprocate. Over time, what happens? Yeah, an imbalance.
One benefits way more than the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what's happening with the trade deficit.
With China.
Yeah. The U.S. consistently buys more from countries like China
Yeah.
than it sells to them,
Right.
resulting in this massive trade imbalance.
Yeah. I see the analogy.
And they argue that this is unsustainable.
In the long run.
Yeah, in the long run.
Okay.
And they suggest the U.S. needs to be more assertive
Yep.
in trade negotiations.
Yeah.
They even suggest, like, tariffs on goods
Okay.
or requiring them to buy a certain amount of American products.
So basically playing hardball
Yeah, they think the U.S. needs to play hardball
to protect its interests.
to protect its economic interests.
Interesting.
They emphasize the need for strong leadership.
To achieve that.
Now, shifting gears a bit,
Okay.
they talk about the power of big tech and its influence on, like, the flow of information.
Right. Huge topic.
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
They bring up the Twitter files,
Oh, yeah.
which revealed how Twitter, under the previous leadership, allegedly suppressed information and even collaborated with government agencies
Oh.
to censor certain viewpoints.
Wow. Okay.
They have some serious concerns about this level of control.
Yeah, it's worrying.
They argue that it undermines free speech.
And open debate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying big tech has become too powerful.
The new gatekeeper.
Yeah, the new gatekeepers.
Right.
And they're using this power to silence dissenting voices.
It makes you wonder what else is happening.
Right. If this was happening on Twitter,
Yeah.
what's happening on Facebook, Google,
Exactly.
they suggest there could be more instances of censorship
And manipulation.
waiting to be uncovered. It raises a huge question.
What's that?
How do we balance content moderation with free speech?
In the digital age.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It is.
On one hand, we don't want harmful content spreading,
Right.
but we don't want to stifle debate.
Or dissenting voices.
It's a delicate balance,
It is.
and they don't offer easy answers.
But it's an important issue.
They highlight the importance of this issue
Yeah.
and the need for a nuanced approach.
Definitely.
They make a pretty bold prediction
About.
the media.
Okay.
If Trump wins,
Yeah.
they say the focus will shift from Trump to
No.
people like Elon Musk and J.D. Vance.
Interesting.
They argue that Musk, with his influence over Twitter
Yeah.
and his outspoken views, will become a target for those trying to discredit the Trump administration.
Okay.
And Vance, as a rising star in the Republican Party and a close Trump ally,
Yeah.
he'll face scrutiny too.
They'll try to paint him as a puppet master.
Exactly.
Pulling Trump's strings.
It's like they're saying the media will be looking for new villains.
New targets to attack.
It paints a pretty intense picture.
It does.
Always looking for the next big story.
The next scandal, the next controversy.
Yeah, it's like a never-ending cycle.
It highlights the need to understand the motivations.
Behind the information.
Yeah, be critical thinkers.
Don't just accept everything at face value.
question everything.
Okay, so they also get into what a second Trump term could look like.
In terms of...
Actual policy, change,
Okay.
and their predictions get really interesting.
Look what?
They suggest Trump might be open to some drastic measures,
Such...
like firing tons of government employees to reduce spending
Okay.
and streamline bureaucracy.
Wow, that's radical.
That's a complete overhaul.
Yeah.
What makes them think he'd go that far?
Well, they compare it to Elon Musk's approach at Twitter.
Right.
Where he significantly reduced the workforce,
Profound
causing
point.
major disruption.
So what Musk did at Twitter
Yeah.
could be a blueprint for Trump.
For the government.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They suggest it could address concerns about overreach,
And inefficiency.
leading to a more responsive government.
But it would be disruptive
Incredibly disruptive,
and face major opposition.
for sure.
But they think Trump might be willing to take that risk.
Okay, what about foreign policy?
What do they say about that?
They think he could be more confrontational
Yeah.
with countries like Iran and China.
They point to his past actions as evidence.
Right.
Withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal.
Right.
Imposing tariffs on Chinese goods.
It's a pattern of challenging the status quo,
And prioritizing American interests.
even if it upsets people.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to mind ruffling feathers.
They even speculate he might take military action against Iran
Wow, if he feels it's necessary.
to protect American interests.
That's a serious claim.
It shows how unpredictable he can be.
Definitely.
Okay, bringing it back to the present.
Okay.
They talk about alternative media.
Podcasts, online news.
What's driving this shift?
They say it's a decline in trust in traditional media.
Okay.
People, especially younger generations,
Yeah.
don't see those outlets as objective anymore.
It's interesting. Piers Morgan admits to seeing this shift.
Even though he comes from traditional media?
He says he's gained a new audience by embracing these new platforms.
It's like the old guard is losing its grip.
And new voices are emerging.
It's a changing landscape.
But doesn't that fragmentation create problems?
Like what?
How do we know what to trust?
Right, that's a good point.
They acknowledge the downsides,
Such as,
the spread of misinformation,
okay,
echo chambers.
where people only hear what they want to hear.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
More voices, but more potential for confusion.
So what's the solution?
They say it comes down to personal responsibility.
Okay.
We need to be more discerning.
With the information we consume.
Be critical thinkers.
Question our assumptions.
Consider different perspectives.
Don't just passively absorb information.
We have to be active participants.
That's a powerful message.
Okay. They also talk about the role of government.
In society.
Yeah.
Big topic.
And their views differ. Morgan takes a more conservative stance.
Okay.
Limited government, individual freedom.
The classic small government philosophy.
Exactly.
Okay.
He's concerned about government overreach, bureaucracy.
Stifling innovation, economic growth.
What about Bet David?
He favors a more active role.
For the government.
Yeah.
In addressing social and economic problems.
Interesting.
He thinks the government has a responsibility to ensure basic necessities.
Oh.
Healthcare, education, a livable wage.
Okay.
He sees government as a force for good.
A safety net.
Yeah, and a driver of progress.
So they have different views.
They lead to a fascinating exchange about regulation.
Okay.
Morgan thinks it stifles businesses.
And innovation.
Bet David thinks it's necessary.
To protect consumers, the environment.
It's a classic debate.
How much regulation is too much?
How much freedom should businesses have?
It's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
It comes down to values, priorities.
How much freedom are we willing to sacrifice?
For collective well-being.
How much risk for economic growth?
Those are big questions.
It's what makes this conversation so thought-provoking.
They're not just talking about the news.
They're digging deeper
Into the underlying philosophies.
that shape our world
And they encourage us to think critically.
about those principles.
Engage in these debates.
They're not just giving answers
They're giving us tools.
to form our own conclusions.
That's powerful.
All right, let's take another quick break.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll explore their thoughts on globalization, the future of work, and even deeper philosophical stuff like the meaning of life and happiness.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back and ready for more of this Patrick Bet David and Piers Morgan conversation.
They really covered a lot of ground, didn't they?
Yeah, it's like every topic you can imagine.
It's pretty amazing.
They touched on some really big picture stuff in this last part,
They did.
like globalization, the future of work.
Yeah, those are big ones.
And I think they did it in a way that wasn't just like surface level.
Right, they went deeper.
That's what I love about this deep dive, you know?
It's not just the headlines.
So let's talk globalization. What's their take?
Well, Piers Morgan sees it as a positive force, mainly.
Okay.
He points to how it's lifted millions out of poverty,
Yeah.
created opportunities all over the world.
Okay, so he's a believer in open markets, free trade.
Exactly. He really emphasizes that.
But Bet David has a slightly different perspective, right?
Yeah, he's a bit more cautious.
What are his concerns?
Well, he acknowledges the benefits,
Uh-huh.
but he also worries about the downsides. Job losses in developed countries.
Right.
The potential for worker exploitation.
Like developing countries.
Yeah, places with fewer regulations.
Like they're winners and losers.
Exactly.
And we don't always talk about the losers.
Right. It's important to consider both sides.
And what about the environmental impact?
Oh, yeah. Bet David brings that up too.
All that transportation, the carbon emissions.
It's a big factor.
So they're really presenting a balanced view,
Trying to see the whole picture.
acknowledging both the good and the bad.
Definitely.
It's not so simple.
Nope.
And that leads them into a discussion about the future of work,
Yeah, another huge topic.
which I'm super fascinated by.
Me too. It feels like everything's changing so fast.
Automation, AI, the gig economy.
It's hard to keep up.
What insights did they offer?
Well, Piers Morgan thinks automation is inevitable,
Okay.
and we need to adapt, embrace it, to increase productivity, create new opportunities.
So he's not afraid of the robots.
He thinks it's about working with them.
What does that look like, though?
He emphasizes retraining workers
Right.
for jobs that require, like, creativity, critical thinking.
So not just technical skills.
Right, things that machines can't do as well.
Those human skills.
Exactly. He thinks those will be in high demand.
Okay, that makes sense.
But Bet David is a bit more concerned.
About,
Mass job displacement.
right.
Increasing inequality.
It's a valid concern.
Yeah, if robots take over all the jobs.
What happens to the people?
Exactly.
How do we make sure everyone benefits?
Not just the ones who are on the robots.
Bet David thinks we need to be proactive
And
in figuring out how to manage this transition
to a more automated world.
and ensure everyone has a chance to succeed.
Right, it's a challenge.
A huge challenge.
For sure.
Now, they also got into some deep philosophical stuff,
Oh, yeah.
talking about the meaning of life
Okay.
and the pursuit of happiness.
Those are big ones.
It's interesting to hear their perspectives.
What do they say?
Well, Piers Morgan believes happiness comes from purpose and meaning,
Okay.
whether it's through work, relationships, or personal pursuits, you know?
It's not just about pleasure.
No, it's about finding something that gives your life direction.
Significance.
And Bet David kind of echoes that.
How so?
He emphasizes living a life of virtue,
Okay.
contributing to something bigger than yourself.
Making a positive impact.
It's like they're both saying happiness isn't something you chase
It's something you cultivate.
through your actions.
And your connections.
And they both acknowledge that life isn't always easy.
Right.
They talk about resilience.
Perseverance in the face of adversity.
They say it's through our struggles that we learn and grow.
That's a powerful message.
We all face challenges, setbacks.
It's how we respond that matters.
They say we have the power to choose our attitude
To learn from our mistakes,
and keep moving forward.
even when it's tough.
Wow, we've covered a lot.
From politics to the meaning of life.
It's been an incredible deep dive.
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me
Yeah.
is the importance of active participation.
What do you mean?
It's not enough to just listen, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
We have
yeah.
to apply these insights to our own lives.
Think critically about the world.
Make choices that align with our values.
They're challenging us to be more than just spectators.
Just step into the arena.
Shape the future.
Exactly.
They've given us the tools.
The insights, the perspectives.
Now it's up to us to use them.
That's a powerful message to end on.
What will you do with it?